Welcome to the Power and Light podcast. This is episode 34, but it's also a very special episode because it is the first of our new sub-series, Faith on the Field. This is a very exciting series for me. I think it's something extremely important for people to hear, and we get to start off with a very special guest. So, joining us from spring training, Major League Baseball in Arizona, we have Ryan Lefebvre, the play-by-play broadcaster for the Kansas City Royals. Ryan, are you enjoying the sunshine down there in Arizona?
I am, and I'm enjoying getting back in the swing of things. But I'm also without my family; they're all back in Kansas City, and so I kind of come and go during spring training. I come down here for about a week. I go home for a few days. Everybody comes down for spring break. We all come down together. I go home with them for a few days, and then I come down a third time. So it sounds crazy, but it is nice to break it up. Baseball in spring training is a lot of fun. It's also a long time too.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. So for the people out there that are not exactly sure, number one, who you are, or two, what you do, can you just give us a general overview of what your job is?
So this will be my 26th year with the Royals. And I usually describe myself as just a radio and television broadcaster for the Royals, although I don't do as much radio as I used to. I do right around 30 games a year on radio and 130 games a year on television, but we're one of very few teams where broadcasters get to do both radio and TV. And when I started 29 years ago with the Minnesota Twins, it was very common for broadcasters to do radio and television. In fact, I used to do radio and TV in the same game. We would start on radio for the first three innings, and then I would switch with somebody, and he'd come to radio, and I would do TV for the middle three innings, and then for the last three innings, we'd switch again. And that was very common. A lot of teams did that. So I was raised with both radio and television, and since then, most teams have gone to a radio team and a television team, but we're one of the few teams where we get to do both. And I'm really grateful for that because I really do enjoy doing both.
That's really special. So we're moving into this new series that I was talking about. But as a broadcaster, we're in a culture right now where people are analyzing everything you say. How much does your faith and your approach to broadcasting, how much is that impacted by your faith and knowing that people could be very frustrated with one word or one sentence that you say?
Well, I don't separate my professional life from my faith. I don't believe that we can completely compartmentalize the two, but I don't use my broadcast in a way to share my faith. I don't think that's what I'm hired to do. People who are around me, and I think probably people who have listened to me over the years and know me outside of me being on the air, hopefully they know that my faith is important to me. But really, what broadcasting has been a platform for me to share my faith. I went through pretty severe depression in 2005, and I wrote a book about it, and I speak a lot about it. And baseball has been a platform for me to share with other people about my experiences with depression. So I don't use broadcasting, I should say this, Josiah, I don't use the broadcast to share my faith, but I definitely use my platform. And when I'm asked to speak to a church or even a secular organization, I feel like if somebody wants to get to know me and know my story, I really can't tell my story without sharing my faith.
Yeah, it's the center of everything, I think, is a great way to look at it. So you just mentioned it right there. You use this platform that you have. You're very vocal about it. You said you even wrote a book. But I guess why is it important for people to be vocal about their faith, whether it's in their job, with their friends, etc.?
Well, number one, I feel like it's part of being a Christian. I mean, it's part of the Great Commission. That's what we're supposed to do. It's really not a strength of mine. Several years ago at our church, they had some classes, if you will, about really honing in on what our spiritual gifts are and how we can grow the body of Christ in our church. And so part of it is a personality test, and you just go through your likes and dislikes and things that come natural and things are more unnatural. And I scored very high in things that are pretty easy for me. Hospitality. My wife Sarah and I love having people at our house and hosting people. Generosity. The Lord's blessed us in a way that we can be generous, and we try and be as generous as we can because we really do feel like this is God's money and He wants us to steward it and use it wisely to improve the health and expand the kingdom. But I scored very low when it came to sharing the gospel with strangers. And so I had a decision that I had to make. I mean, it'd be very easy for me to leave that class and say, well, I'm really good at hospitality. I'm really good at generosity. I think we're doing that right now. I'm just going to keep focusing on that. But I really felt like the Holy Spirit was saying to me, you could do that, or you can work on the things that you're not very strong in. Now, you put me in a group of people, a large group of people at a church or a men's group, or maybe anywhere that's not a completely secular organization where I feel comfortable sharing my faith. For whatever reason, I have no trouble on this podcast. I have no trouble in front of a group of people sharing my faith and what my faith has meant to me and the miracles and God has done in my life and the specific ways that He has answered prayers to show me that He answered the prayer. I have no trouble with that. But a stranger who is struggling in life, and I can tell what's missing in their life is their faith. They're doing everything else right, or at least they think they're doing everything else right. That was not a strength of mine. So I decided to choose the latter and realize that that's something that I really, really need to work on, is just having faith, as the Bible says, when I'm confronted with an opportunity where I either have to defend my faith or share my faith, that the Spirit will give me the words that I need to do it effectively. And so ever since I took that test, it's become more comfortable for me. I wouldn't say that I'm really comfortable in a one-on-one relationship, but those are the different ways that so I guess the long answer to your short question is using my job as a platform to speak to a lot of people is much easier for me to share my faith, but it's just Ryan Lefebvre, the human being, one-on-one. For whatever reason, that's more challenging than it is a large group.
If there was someone out there that's listening right now that's in a similar situation to you a couple years back, what would be your advice to them that with having that issue, to not even an issue, just having that struggle to talking to that stranger, what things helped you? What, I guess, verses in the Bible in general, I guess, what spoke to you in that moment, and how have you grown continuing to work on that skill?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. I think the first thing is we need to develop a relationship with someone if we're gonna share something that deep. I mean, I don't think standing on a street corner and yelling into a megaphone and saying, choose Jesus Christ or you're going to burn in eternity. I don't personally, that's not what attracted me to my faith. It was more a relationship with somebody, say Mike Sweeney, for instance. When he was a player for the Royals, he was really my first friend, and he had a huge influence on me when I came to Kansas City in 1999, because he was a man of strong faith, but he lived it out. He didn't hit me over the head with it. And our friendship was such that I realized that there was something different about him. There was something unique about him. And being around him long enough, you figure out right away that it's his faith. But we established a friendship first. We established a relationship. So when it got time to peel back some layers and talk about faith, it was comfortable, as opposed to seeing somebody who's struggling and the relationship isn't there. And we don't know, Josiah, if they know anything about Jesus, or if they've had a bad experience at another church, or maybe their parents dragged them to church every Sunday, but then their parents weren't very Christ-like the other 6 days of the week. We really don't know where they're coming from. So to just dive right in, for some people, they can handle that. But I think for the majority of people that either don't have faith or they're struggling with their faith, the relationship comes first. So that's number one. And then number two, which took some of the pressure off of me, our pastor, Christian Newsom at our church in Lee Summit, said, we're not called to convert people, we're called to witness to people. And so my job is not to have tallies where I'm keeping track of how many people that I've led to Christ, or how many people were saved because of whatever inspiration that I added. That's great if that happens. I'm not diminishing that, but really what we're called to do is just witness and share with people what God has done in our lives, and what Jesus has done for us, and what I continue to learn about him when I read the Bible. And so that took some pressure off of it for me, is to realize that if I can't model for somebody what I think a life of a Christian should be, and attract in that way, then it really doesn't matter what I'm going to say. If I'm a hypocrite, or if I just don't model Christianity very well, it really doesn't matter, what words I come up with, because first and foremost, I think they have to look at me, and as I did to Mike Sweeney, and think there's something special, there's something different about him. Tell me more.
Yeah, it's incredible that you had that person when you came to Kansas City. I like to think that Kansas City is amazing. That's why we have this podcast. But there's these people in Kansas City, and it's a broad amount of people. There's a lot of people, and I'm glad that you're able to find that one person that started that relationship here in Kansas City. So the next thing I want to ask you about is one of the greatest things that I love about the Bible, or at least one of the greatest stories, is obviously when Jesus died on the cross for our sins. But God sent Jesus to die for us. The Father sent his Son. As a father, now you have multiple kids. You mentioned that earlier. How does your perspective on the sacrifice that God made as a father, how does your perspective on that story and your faith in general, how has that changed?
Yeah, it changes when you have kids. I mean, it's a great story. It's the greatest story in the history of the world. But yeah, when you really think about a father sending his son as a sacrifice for someone else's sins, and to be nailed to a cross to redeem people who don't deserve it, and someone who didn't deserve to be crucified is taking on the sins of the world. I mean, you put it in that way, that does change the story. It changes the context of the story. And I think but as a father, I can also use that as a way of teaching it to my sons. I have 3 sons and a daughter. And as I share my faith with them, just I've always been intrigued by, we are created in God's image. And the reason that's intrigued me is that I don't know if we spend enough time understanding what that means, and how what we experience as human beings are very relatable to what God experiences. And certainly Jesus experienced it, being, fully God and fully human. But there's just a lot of relatable things, like when I'm frustrated with my kids, God's probably frustrated with me. When my kids are mad at me, and because they want something and they don't understand, that happens to God all the time. Just go read the Psalms, and David crying out to God and being very bold in asking God, why won't you give me whatever it is he wants? I mean, the Bible is filled with people calling out to God saying, I think you're wrong. And so that part of having kids and getting through fatherhood also makes me understand my relationship with God more, because he is our father, and he had a son, an equal, that he sent to the earth to be one of us, and had to watch him suffer for being without sin. And so at times, the relationship that I have with God can be as complicated as I want it to be, or it can be as simple as I want it to be. And I remind myself, we are created in God's image. There are a lot of relatables here on earth that God deals with, being the creator of the universe.
Yeah, it's really a special perspective that hopefully one day I'll be able to experience. Obviously, I do not right now. I want to ask one more question about your evangelizing experience. You played some collegiate baseball, and then you played some minor league baseball. From a dugout perspective, obviously, you've talked about broadcasting side of it, but from a dugout perspective, what does evangelizing look like for, let's say, a baseball player or a softball player or any athlete that's on the sidelines?
Well, that one I can't speak from experience because I was raised Catholic and I had a wonderful experience in Catholicism. I had some priests who were more about Jesus than they were about the Catholic Church. And so there are a lot of people who have fallen away from the Catholic Church because they were dissatisfied or something worse than that, or maybe they just felt like Catholicism was more about Catholicism than it was about Jesus. I didn't have that experience. I had a great experience in Catholicism. So I would go to Mass quite a bit, but I wasn't living out my faith at all. So I was not in any, I needed to be evangelized too when I was in college and was in the minor leagues because I was not making good choices in my personal life. I was not an example of a Christian man, a godly man, outside of going to church on Sunday, or if I was depressed or worried about something and I might go to daily Mass. Now, God was planting seeds in me during that time. I mean, I enjoyed going to church and I felt very fulfilled going to church. And I was very intrigued by the word when I would go to church. And in Catholicism, the sermon is called a homily. And I look forward to the homily every Mass because I just wanted the priest to pour in something to me to help my brokenness. So I was being drawn to my faith, but I wasn't living it out. And so that came after my playing career was over. It came after a lot of heartache, after my broadcasting career was pretty well established and I was chasing all the wrong things. And it probably wasn't really until I went through my depression in 2005 that I decided, I realized that I was out of balance. You know, my faith was here and everything else was up here. You know, my career, my possessions, my reputation, my relationships, and who I was dating and who I was hanging out with. And it wasn't until God literally allowed me to be broken, which was an answer to a prayer. He didn't answer it the way I thought he was going to answer it, but he answered the prayer, which led to my depression, that I really needed to tip the scales in the other direction and make my faith come first, and then everything else flowed from that.
Yeah, that balance is so important. All right, you are the broadcaster of the Royals. I know that you just said balance-wise, obviously that's going to be on the lower side of it. But you do have an insight that some people or most people would not. So first off, this is spring training. It's the time of optimism for all baseball fans. Why should Royals fans be optimistic right now?
Well, they spent a lot of time and a lot of money to improve the roster. I mean, they have improved the outfield. They have improved the infield. They just signed a catcher the other day, Austin Nola, so they've improved the catching position. They have added 2 veteran starting pitchers to the rotation, Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo. They have added veteran pitchers to the back end of the bullpen, Will Smith, whose career's come full circle and he's back with us again, and Chris Stratton. So they really have addressed every part of the team, the entire roster. And these are players that the Royals believe still have something in the tank and they're still going to be able to produce at a high level. And a lot of these guys have won before, so they're not just bona fide major leaguers, but they know what winning looks like. And then I think, when Royals fans ask me, well, what do you really think about the team? What do you really think about all these additions? And the answer that I keep coming back to is, aside from the numbers and the track records that these guys have, what I'm most excited about is, for the last 2 or 3 years, the Royals have had to depend on a lot of young players to be in roles that they're just not ready for. You know, their role and their major league experience doesn't quite line up. So what's happened though is they've gotten a lot of experience. They've experienced a lot of ups and downs, and for most of them, which is normal, there have been more downs than ups, but there have been enough reasons for optimism. Well, now you bring in a lot of veterans, and that takes pressure off of these young guys. So these young guys have experience, but now they're not expected to hit in the middle of the batting order. They're not expected to be the ace of the starting rotation. They're not expected to be the eighth inning and the ninth inning relievers. They can now take the experiences that they had, but and just develop more and play with less anxiety, less pressure on their shoulders. And it's a very small percentage of big league players, Josiah, a tiny percentage of young players that can perform at a high level when they're under stress. And it's the ones who are able to forget about the bad game last night or forget about the bad week that they just had, keep showing up and being positive. And that comes with experience. I mean, that comes with living through several major league seasons and at the end of the year looking back and saying, gosh, why was I so stressed out about those 2 weeks in April? I mean, that's just a small fraction of the entire season. So that just comes with experience. So a lot of these guys have experience now, but now they're veteran guys who are going to be able to take some of the burden off of them.
So, yes, that next play mentality is huge. And these guys that were rookies just a couple years ago now have that opportunity to, I guess, express that. But you mentioned that the veterans coming in, that's super important for their development. But also for team chemistry, these guys came up through the minor leagues, not completely all together, same level at a time, but most of them have played together in the minor leagues. How much do you think that contributes to the chemistry of the Royals as a whole?
Well, I can compare it to two other groups of players. When I was with the Minnesota Twins, my last year was 1998. And about the second half of the season, they started bringing up a bunch of young players. Torrey Hunter, Jock Jones, A.J. Pierzynski, Doug Minkiewicz, Corey Koski. And they were overwhelmed by the big leagues. I mean, they made the jump to the big leagues. But all those guys had played together in the minor leagues, and they had won together in the minor leagues. So it took them a while to get going in the big leagues. But eventually they knew that they liked playing together. They believed in each other. They trusted each other, and they had won together. And eventually that group won, that core group. Some guys eventually were traded away or whatever, but that core ended up winning 6 divisions over 9 years with the Twins. The second example was in 2011, the Royals started bringing up Eric Hosmer, Mike Moustakas, Salvador Perez, Greg Holland. I'm going to miss some guys here. Danny Duffy. I believe the next year, Lorenzo Cain came up for the first time. Alcides Escobar. Those two after the trade with the Milwaukee Brewers. And most of those guys had won together in the minor leagues, and they liked playing baseball together. And so they came up in 11. We lost 90 games in 2012. They had a winning season in 2013, and then they went to the World Series in 14 and 15. Now, that's not an automatic formula where you just punch in the data into a computer and hit enter, and you're guaranteed that that's what's going to happen. But to your point of coming up together and just trusting one another and enjoying playing baseball with each other, being accountable to one another, managers and coaches play a huge role of helping guide young players when they get to the big leagues. But when you have a group of guys that already know each other and trust each other and they hold themselves accountable, and as we like to say, they police themselves in the clubhouse. I mean, that's a winning atmosphere. If you have managers and coaches that are constantly in the clubhouse, in the dugout, trying to motivate these guys or hold players accountable, I mean, that's just not a very good formula for winning. But when you have players who are accountable to one another and they police themselves, I mean, that's a good culture for winning. So I've seen 2 examples, one with the Minnesota Twins and one with the Royals that really paid off.
Yeah, that Royals one definitely worked out well. I was going to ask you, though, about the culture. Do you think the culture was established before they got up to the major leagues? I'm saying this young crew, obviously there's the group of batters, but there's also the pitchers. And then the other question I have about the pitchers is, how much do you think Zach Greinke has invested, or I guess, what are the fruits of Zach Greinke's investments over the last couple months, year, whatever?
Well, to the first question, the team that won the World Series, I'm glad you brought that up, Josiah, because there really was no winning culture when they arrived. I mean, Alex Gordon was here and Billy Butler was here, and they were both all-stars. But the Royals were not winning when all those guys were called up in 2011. They had to establish their own culture. That's not easy to do. The best case scenario, teams like the Cardinals that they finished in last place last year, but they win just about every year. The Braves win every year. The Dodgers win every year. The Yankees, they have a winning record every year. And the best case scenario is that you have a core of veteran players and you bring up one or two rookies and you don't expect much from them. You bring them up, they bat seventh, eighth, or ninth. If you have a starting pitcher, you put them in the number 5 spot of the rotation, and there's no pressure on them. They're protected by veterans who have been there for a while and they have won. There's already a winning culture that's there. The young player just kind of toes the line and they continue to win. But when you bring up a lot of young players at one time and then you're asking them to perform and establish a culture at the major league level at the same time, that's not a good formula at all. So it's even more remarkable what all those guys did, being that there was no winning culture and they still turned it into a World Series championship is pretty remarkable. As far as Zach Greinke goes, as you and I are talking right now, he's still unsigned. I really don't know the interest that the Royals have in him, but I can tell you it was really nice to have him back the last 2 years. He did not leave on good terms. He won the Cy Young in 2009. The Royals had a bad year in 2010. And in Zach's defense, the Royals were just never good when he was here. Never good. I mean, he went through 90 and 100 lost seasons every year, and he wanted to win, and he forced the Royals to make a trade. Thank goodness he forced the Royals to make a trade because we got Lorenzo Cain and Alcides Escobar out of it. Lorenzo Cain was the 2014 ALCS MVP. Alcides Escobar was the 2015 ALCS MVP, and they went to 2 World Series. So we have Zach Greinke to thank for that. But, when Zach left, I think he wanted to leave, and quite frankly, a lot of us felt like it was time for him to leave. So for him to come back and as a veteran and as an older player now, I mean, I'll never forget when he took the mound as a 20-year-old in Oakland in 2003. But, now he's 40 years old and he has 3 kids and he's had a long career. And for him to come back, I think it was very healing for a lot of us, including Zach.
That's awesome, because it's one of those things where yes, he was a young player last time, but when you look at the blueprint, if you want to call it, for this next group of kids, I think it's huge that he's investing in, especially that pitching staff that has been one of the biggest issues for this Royals team. The other thing I want to ask, because this guy is pretty special, I think everybody would call Bobby Witt Jr. the face of the franchise for the Royals. He just signed that massive contract. What do you think is the message being sent by the Royals ownership by signing him to that contract?
Well, it's impressive what they've done, because what the Royals have done is they put the cart in front of the horse. And usually when you use that expression, you're not complimenting someone, you're criticizing someone for getting too far ahead of themselves, making decisions, rash decisions. But what the Royals easily could have done, Josiah, and nobody would have blamed them for it, is they could say, okay, look, on April 2nd, we have a stadium deal on the ballot. And the reason why we need a new stadium, and this is true, the reason why we need a new stadium is we need to generate more revenue so that we can compete and keep our players. So it's going to be on the ballot at April 2nd. If you vote yes, this is going to allow us to go out and spend some money. We can sign some free agents. We can sign Bobby Witt Jr. to a long-term contract. But ownership put the cart in front of the horse. They went out and signed Bobby Witt Jr. They brought in a bunch of veterans. They spent a lot of money this past offseason to bring in veteran players with no guarantee of a stadium yet. So I think if you're a Royals fan, that's encouraging. Yes, they needed to spend money. Yes, they needed to improve the team. And yes, they needed to at least try to sign Bobby Witt Jr. to a long-term contract. And they got all of that done in front of the stadium vote. I think it also speaks to Bobby Witt Jr. too. I mean, he didn't have to take this contract. I mean, he very well could have played here for 3 more years, maybe 4, and just tested free agency. And who knows what kind of numbers he's going to put up over the course of, the next 3 to 4 years. He's from Texas. He could easily say, I'm just going to go back and sign with the Rangers and live at home, or maybe go play for a large market team and make even more money. So the Royals made a huge commitment financially to sign Bobby Witt Jr., but we can't forget that Bobby Witt Jr. also had to say yes, and that he also wants to stay here in Kansas City.
Yeah, I think he's the first, right? He's the first person to say, yes, this is where I want to be, and I have a feeling that if players start to follow suit, this could be a very similar route as that 2015 team and 2014 team as well. It was one team with a few changes, and I think I'd love to follow that blueprint again. But the one thing I wouldn't want to follow is the downfall, if you could call it that, after winning a World Series over the last couple years and the years before that. How is it as a broadcaster? You've been around calling Royals games for a while. You just mentioned that. How does it, I guess, dealing with losses? How, as a broadcaster, how do you still create entertainment? And then when you guys win, when the Royals win, does that make it just even more sweet?
Yeah, I think as a younger broadcaster, I know that I struggled in the losing seasons, because a lot of those losing seasons, we could tell very early on that this was going to be a losing season. So, we're in the middle of May and the season's effectively over, and now we still have to broadcast 4.5 months worth of games. This isn't football where you gear up for one day a week, and then the next 6 days you get ready for the next one. I mean, this is day after day after day for 6 months. But I also learned that through experience, I mean, a lot of this is just experience, that there's a chance every game that something special can happen. And if I get bogged down by how bad we are and how many more games we have to play, it's going to affect my broadcast. But every game is a new opportunity for something to happen, and I don't want to cheat the listeners and the viewers from the big moment, because, who cares? We're not going to go to the playoffs this year. Well, that's not what people want to listen to. And, for instance, last year, I mean, Bobby Witt Jr. hits a walk-off grand slam against the Minnesota Twins at Kauffman Stadium. It's just a great moment. And I didn't know that was going to happen when the game started, but I can tell you that I went into that game with a blank slate and not thinking about what happened last night or last week or last month with the team, and just, okay, here's some of the important things to keep in mind about tonight's game. If moments begin to build themselves, I don't want to decide in my mind that, well, this is not really that big of a moment, because even if they win, who cares? I mean, they're still in last place. Hey, this is a big moment. And I've learned this, Josiah, is there are a lot of good reasons for social media to exist in the big picture. But social media is also a place where people can very freely vent, and in some ways being anonymous and not having to be accountable for their thoughts. And so if I spend too much time listening to fans who are venting, and fans who are venting are still good fans, but when we vent, you're not usually getting how we really feel in the big picture. It's just how we feel right now about a particular situation. Or if I listen to talk radio, which, again, you weigh the pros and cons of talk radio, clearly there are more pros than cons. But a lot of times when things aren't going well, it's an opportunity for people to vent. And, I can be Joe Blow from Lee Summit, and unless somebody recognizes my voice, I'm just this anonymous voice, and I can get whatever I want off my chest, and I don't have to be accountable to anybody about it. So that's one side. The other side is that I have learned that most fans, and when I say most fans, I'm not saying 51% of the fans, I'm saying 75 to 80% of the fans at least, maybe more than that. Most of their days go something like this. They get up in the morning, they go to work, they go to school, they spend the day there, they come home, they get something to eat. If they have a family, they have dinner, they might have the game on in the background, they put their kids to bed, maybe they sit down and watch the game for 20, 30 minutes, maybe longer if the game's a good one, or the student while they're studying, they have the game on and it's just kind of background noise until I raise my voice because something exciting happens, and then they might turn to the TV and see what's going on and be more attentive. But then the night comes to an end, and whether the Royals win or lose, they go to sleep and they get up the next day and they go to work or school, and they might talk to a friend and say, boy, did you see that game last night? Good or bad? You see the game last night? And they have a conversation for about 3 to 5 minutes, and then they move on. They go back to work or they go back to class, whatever, and then the next night there's another game. In my experience, I believe that is the vast majority of Royals fans. So if that's who's listening and that's who's watching, even in a 106 loss season, they want to hear what's good about the team. Now, I'm not going to lie to them. I'm not going to tell them that a 180 hitter is having a good year. I mean that just hurts my credibility. But I understand that most people who are watching the Royals, they want the Royals to do well. If something is going on that, for instance, a coach tells me, hey, I know Kyle Isbell isn't getting a lot of hits right now, but we really like the way he's swinging the bat, and we think he's close to getting on a hot streak, whatever. That's something that I can share on the air. And if he gets a base hit, hey, maybe this is the first of many to come because I talked to Alex Zumwalt, the hitting coach, and he said that, blah, 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 fill in the blank. I think that's what most fans want to hear. And long ago, I realized that I am a triangle of three things. I am in a journalism point of view, first of all, I'm a reporter. I am reporting to you everything that I see in front of me. If it's on radio, without my voice, you have no idea what's going on. On television, I'm just trying to complement what you can already see on your screen. So I'm reporting what you're seeing. I'm also like a columnist. I think eventually, in this day and age, broadcasters are expected to insert some of our opinion in there as well. Some are more opinionated than others. But for me to just go and give the count and give the score and that's it, I think, by today's standards, that's just boring. I have to have somewhat of an opinion. And the third point on that triangle is I've always believed that I'm an extension of the Royals public relations department. I'm trying to shed as positive a light as I can on the team. Sometimes it's a big, obvious light. When you got someone like Bobby Witt Jr., you just shine a big old light on Bobby Witt Jr. and it speaks for itself. Sometimes it's like a little pen light. There's not much light at all. But fans don't work hard all day, and students don't go to school all day to come home and listen to an announcer complain about the team and basically tell people, turn the game off. This team is terrible. They're not good. Just go find something else to watch on TV or go put something else on radio. That's not my job. My job is to try and get people to engage with the players, share some personal stories so they might feel a connection to them because, I tell a story about a guy learned to throw a curveball from his late grandfather and whatever, and it humanizes the players. And hopefully at some point they'll buy some tickets and they'll want to come out and watch them in person. So it's been an evolving process of realizing what my role is and who the majority of people that I'm speaking to and what they really want. And that's the beauty of baseball. They could lose 12-1 one day and then win 12-1 the next day. And in both scenarios, they're going to be talking to their friends about it the next day. But I think most of them move on. They move on with their lives and they move on to the next game. I think it's a small percentage of people that spend the whole day tweeting about it and posting about it and digging up numbers about it. And it just consumes everything that they're doing. Those fans are important, don't get me wrong. But I don't think that's the majority that I'm speaking to.
You mentioned humanizing the players and I call those stories. I think you would say the same thing. There's stories about the player. What, if you had to give a percentage, baseball is a very statistical game. There's lots of stats involved. I would argue more than any other game. If you had to give a percentage, would you give what percentage to stories and what percentage to stats? As a broadcaster, this is something that I'm trying to learn and get in the flow of.
Yeah. Well, there's no obvious answer to that question. That what the true answer, Josiah, is it's what's going on in front of you right now. And to go into a game with all these stats written down on your scorecard, and you've just decided that, here, and usually, um, I'm gonna I'm gonna use my quote right now. I know we do that later, but you and I, before this interview started, you told me I needed to know a quote, and I went blank. Well, here's my quote for you. Okay, I think it was Mark Twain, but I heard it from Vin Scully, who was the voice of my youth with the Los Angeles Dodgers. And Vin Scully used to say that broadcasters use statistics like a drunk uses a lamppost for support, not illumination, which is a great line because he's right. If we run out of things to say, or we think we've run out of things to say, we might say, um, well, here's Josiah Winnell, and he's hitting. I don't know why I've landed on 267. For some reason in my mind, I've decided that 267 is just a vanilla number. Josiah hits 267 against lefties. Well, that's just great. What does that tell you about Josiah against lefties? Nothing. Now, if he hits 167 against lefties, why? Why does he struggle? If he hits 467 against lefties, that's interesting. So in my mind, I try to just avoid numbers that's just data. I'm just giving you data. There's no meaning behind it. A story is the same way. The best stories are the ones that are told with good timing, in that the story fits what's going on the field. But whenever as broadcasters we try and wedge a story in there because, oh, this is a great story, I can't wait to tell that story. And I made that mistake for years as a broadcaster. But this ties back to the beginning of the interview. I mean, we just have to have some faith that if we have this great story, and it's easier with baseball because we do it every day. But if I have this great story, I'm going to sit on it until the timing is right to tell the story. So I've just given you a bunch of loose ends. If I'm going to tie up all those loose ends, the best statistics are something that's applicable to what's going on either in this game or what's happening in the game right now. Okay. So you've got a number that you throw out there that, first of all, it's interesting, and you add some color to it. So if you're hitting 467 against lefties, hopefully I've talked to you before the game and asked you why you're having such a good year against lefties. And you say, you know what? I've never hit lefties well, but this past offseason, I decided I need to change my approach to hit lefties because I want to play every day. I don't want to be a platoon player. So here's what I learned, and you give me all the details. Okay. So you come up against a lefty, and then if it's a TV game, there's the screen, 467 against lefties. And then I go into the story because it fits. Or maybe it says 467 against lefties and you fly out to left field on the first pitch. That's not a good time to tell the story right there, because now I'm telling why you're doing so well against lefties, and you just fly it out to left field, and now the next hitter's coming up, and I'm still telling a story about you when another hitter's up. So I think it's a combination of statistics, applicable statistics, interesting statistics that you can add some color to. You're not just throwing a number out there and forcing the audience to come up with their own conclusion. And then just finding the right time to tell a story. And it just comes with experience. I mean, there have been plenty of times I've been right in the middle of a great story, and then somebody gets caught stealing to end the inning, just like that, and I haven't finished the story. And that's just the way that it goes. I mean, it just there's no way around that. But just keeping in mind that there's a game going on, and number one, that's the most important thing, to talk about what's going on either on the screen or over the radio, and just trusting your preparation that when the stat is right, that it'll be there for you. When the story is right, it'll be that for you. And let me add this too. I was telling you about what I think our audience is, 75 to 80% of our audience. Another mistake that a broadcaster can make, and this happens if you spend too much time on social media, is that you think that everybody you're listening to is following the team as closely as somebody on social media who's following it very closely. And you have to remember, when you're broadcasting a game, there are three types of fans. There are fans that follow the game. They follow every single game. The Royals are their passion. They know the numbers. They know almost as much as I know what's going on about the team. And I'm probably not going to give them a lot that they already know, but that's a very small percentage. The second part are fans that follow the Royals pretty closely, but they don't really have the time to follow them as closely as they would like. They might go 3 or 4 days where they've missed a game because of work. And so when they do watch a game, they're kind of catching up on what's going on. But I wouldn't call them experts on the game. And so we still want to be able to give them something that stimulates them intellectually, but not talk over their heads. And then you can't forget about the fans that just love the Royals and love the players, but they know very little about baseball. And the mistake you make with those fans is you start using all of this baseball jargon and all this baseball lingo, and you start using all these analytics that make no sense to that fan. I'm not doing anything for them. And I'm really not doing a lot for the middle category as well. And if I start using a bunch of numbers and stats, the people that I'm trying to impress with all those stats, they already know all those stats. And they probably think they know more about me than anyway. So it really is a blend of understanding your audience and letting what's happening on the field or the court dictate where you go with stats and where you go with stories, as opposed to you, despite what's going on in the field or on the court, jamming in all these statistics and all of these stories because you want your audience to think you know what you're talking about.
That's extremely helpful, so thank you. So let's finish out the baseball questions with some rapid fire questions. I have a couple quick, hopefully easy answer questions. So first, I want to ask you about Salvador Perez. How, I guess, his personality, the way he plays, why is he the perfect captain for this Kansas City Royal team?
It's tough to be a superstar. And the reason why it's tough to be a superstar is because you're expected to be a superstar all the time, both on the field and off the field. And Salvy's a human being, and there are times where Salvy might not be in the mood to sign autographs, or he might not be in the mood to do an interview, or maybe he's had a bad week at the plate and he's just not feeling it as a hitter or whatever. As a superstar, you really don't have the choice to be a jerk. You don't have the choice to not work hard for a day because maybe you just need a mental break or a physical break or whatever. It's unfair, but you're expected to be a performer on and off the field all the time. And what's always impressed me about Salvy, he's one of the most impressive superstars I've ever been around, because I don't know if I've ever seen him be rude to a fan. There might be times where he has to get on the bus and get to the stadium or get to the hotel because the bus is going to leave and he can't sign every single autograph. But you learn more about somebody when they're a superstar because they're supposed to be on. The red light is on all the time for them. He handles it so well, and I think it has to do with his humble upbringings in Venezuela. He has not forgotten where he came from. Pedro Grifol, who was our bench coach for years and now the manager of the White Sox, said something about Salvy that I'll never forget. And Salvy was it was the year that Salvy, gosh, it was 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. They all run together after a while. But Salvy wrecked his thumb in the season and had to have surgery on his thumb. And he came back way sooner than anybody thought he was going to come back. And I was asking Pedro, and Salvy has this reputation of just being a fast healer. And some people are just fast healers. Some people are slow healers. Salvy's a fast healer. And I was talking to Pedro, and Pedro said, Salvy is the rare superstar player who understands that this will come to an end someday. There will come a point where he will no longer be able to play Major League Baseball. And because of that, he savors every moment. He savors every moment he gets to catch. He had a blast playing first base last year. He finds a way to have fun every single day. Some days more than others because he's a human being. But I never forgot that. And really what happens, Josiah, is guys are used to being a superstar, and they get superstar confused with being Superman. And when they can't perform at a level that they're used to, it's really hard for them to realize they aren't what they used to be. It's really hard for the coaches and the managers to take them out of the lineup and not play them every day because they're not as productive as they used to be. It can be, I remember Mike Matheny told me that when he became manager of the Cardinals way back when, and he was replacing Tony La Russa, and Tony La Russa was giving him advice. And Tony La Russa said, the hardest thing you'll ever have to deal with is a superstar who realizes he's not a superstar anymore. So that I know that was not a rapid fire answer, but that's what makes Salvador Perez so special.
It's a great answer. We owe a lot to him in Kansas City. Any Kansas City baseball fan, he's been a huge part of everything. Okay, another quick question. Why was Alcides Escobar's inside the park home run so unprecedented?
I mean, it was game one of the World Series. The Mets were favored, even though the Royals had been to the World Series the year before. They had all that pitching. And, they're a big market East Coast team. They were just going to come in and just stomp all over the small market Royals. I mean, they weren't really giving us, credit that the team deserved. And if you remember, Escobar at that time was swinging at the first pitch. He was leading off, which on paper, Alcides Escobar should have never been a leadoff hitter, but it worked. It just worked. Ned Yost put him there and it worked. And it went to a completely different level because he would swing at the first pitch of the game, every game. And more times than not, he'd get a hit. And now he hits an inside the park home run to begin game one of the World Series. I mean, I thought Kauffman Stadium the concrete was going to crumble into a pile of rubble. Everyone was so excited when he hit that home run.
They were so hungry after losing 2014. So I think I wasn't there, but watching on TV, I could experience the emotion even though I wasn't there. Okay, it's okay if your answer is just is a separate answer, but if you're in the place of Terry Collins in 2015, are you taking out or leaving in Matt Harvey?
Well, just from experience, I've never been a major league manager and never will be a major league manager. So when I say experience, I mean just what I've heard over time. That if a manager has the conviction to make a move, he's got to stick with it. And Terry Collins was ready to take Matt Harvey out, and in retrospect, it seemed to be the right move. He had a closer who I don't think Jerry's Familia had given up a blown save since like July or something like that. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Every manager loves to have a starting pitcher that wants to stay in the game. But this was not okay. I'm gonna turn this into a long answer again. So in 1991, this is a long time before you were born, but in 1991, I was at the University of Minnesota. I was a junior, and the Twins were in the World Series against the Atlanta Braves. Jack Morris, a Hall of Famer, pitched 9 innings in a 0-0 game, game 7. I mean, just a thrilling game. I remember being in my apartment in college, watching it on TV, and I was my face was about this far from the screen. I mean, it's just a great game. Jack Morris went out for the 10th inning, and the Twins ended up winning 1-0 in the bottom of the 10th inning. Years later, I learned that Tom Kelly, who was the manager of the Twins, and he was the manager of the Twins when I was there for 4 years, Tom Kelly wasn't sure what to do with Jack Morris. But he was willing to leave Jack Morris in the game, but he needed to find a way to figure out how badly Jack Morris wanted to stay in. So he goes up to Jack Morris and pats him on the shoulder and says, nobody could have asked you to do more than what you've done tonight. Okay? So that's not your coming out of the game. It's also not your staying in the game. He kind of left it. I think he wanted Jack Morris to go back out, but Jack Morris was a veteran at that point. He needed Jack Morris to let him know if he wanted to go back out there. So he pats him on the back and says, nobody could expect anything more than what you've done tonight. And I guess Jack Morris snapped his head and said, I'm not coming out of this bleepity bleep game. So Tom Kelly ran him back out there. He pitched a scoreless 10th and they win the World Series. Okay. That's total. Now that story, the reason I bring that up, that story came up with Terry Collins and Matt Harvey because Matt Harvey wanted to go back out there. But Terry Collins had decided that Matt Harvey was coming out of the game. he didn't go to Matt Harvey to ask him if he could go out. He had made the decision that he was coming out of the game. So just what I've learned from managers, I mean, you are the manager, you are in charge. If the decision had been made in his mind, then he needs to go with the decision that he made. And he let the player talk him out of it.
Yeah. That's a great answer. I've never actually heard that story, so I feel like that's a great comparison. Maybe that was something in the back of Terry Collins' mind. Maybe not. But it's one of those things. It's like if it went the other way, he would be renowned as a hero. He would be known as a hero, but that's not how it worked out, and I think Royals fans are very happy about that. Jorge Soler just signed a new contract with another team. How cool is it for you to see him have success, especially after having success with the Royals a couple of years ago?
You know, I saw him hit 48 home runs one year, and the next year he was lost. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen a player of his caliber be as lost as he was. I mean, he was just, I mean, they tried everything to get him going. And he probably tried to hit more than 48 home runs the next year, which is, you know, that's a bad place for a player to be. But they got him going just enough to be able to trade him to the Atlanta Braves. And he ends up being the World Series MVP. So that was he wasn't here. He wasn't with us for very long. You know, he didn't do a whole lot with the Cubs. The label potential was always there, but you know, we traded him for Wade Davis. So if you get traded for Wade Davis, you better be pretty good, considering how good he was for the Royals. So I think he had that hanging over his head. I think he had a little bit of a bust label over his head based on what he did and what he didn't do as a member of the Cubs. And then he hits 48 home runs for us, and I mean, he was unstoppable that year. That was really fun to watch. But to see him, I mean, I remember some of us were thinking, like, is he done? Like, next year, does he go to another team on a minor league contract? I mean, he looked that bad at the plate, and it went on for weeks and months. But they found something to get him going just enough to make the trade to the Atlanta Braves.
It worked out very nicely for the Braves. I think that's one of the coolest World Series moments ever when he hit that home run that got him that World Series MVP, in my opinion. I think it's an incredible moment. All right, last rapid fire question before I get to two other questions. You just became the celebrity of the newest QT Royals commercial on social media. Now, it was just at the very end, but you had a little bit of an appearance there. First off, what was that experience like? Did you really not want to do that audition? And then number two, who do you think should be the representative for the Royals to QT? Who did the best job?
Well, full disclosure, I haven't seen it yet. Okay. So I'll have to, when we're done, I'll have to go find it somewhere. But the Royals wanted me because they told me, here's what we think is going to happen. The guys aren't going to be able to recite the lines right away, and we need someone to come in and be the guy that says, you know, take one or whatever. So we need you to come in like with a good attitude at first, and then at the end you just become like exasperated by it all, and then I think I say something at the end like this was improvised because they said, do you want me to do the recording? And they say, nope, we're good. But I don't know how it came across, but I think that I said, do you want to use me? And before they could say no, I just threw the thing and I'm like, good, and just kind of like stormed off. I guess that's what you probably saw. But that was most of that was scripted, but that last scene just kind of evolved as we were just having fun with it.
Well, I was.
So I wasn't as cranky as I came across. That's how they wanted me to come across.
Well, I was laughing. I was doing little giggles along the whole time, and then at the very end, the people that were patient enough to watch all the way till the end, they got surprised by you there at the end, which I think you did an incredible acting job. Maybe you chose the wrong career. So,
thank you.
Okay, last two questions. I want to shift our focus back to, I guess, our audience that maybe is younger, maybe around my age, maybe an athlete, maybe someone like me that wants to become a broadcaster. But in general, people that play sports, there's hundreds of millions of people that play sports. And I think the reason I wanted to start this episode, let's start this podcast, is because I think sports is such a great platform. You already mentioned the platform for what you have, but sports in general is a great platform. And really, right now, with football, with soccer across the world, it's everywhere. Every sport, has a spotlight on it right now. Why is it important for us to use sports as a way to evangelize?
Well, I didn't see it that way up until maybe it was probably the COVID year, Josiah, to be honest with you, when I realized how badly people wanted sports. And we only played 60 games in 2020, but the world was upside down and people didn't know. I mean, is this ever going to end? I mean, am I going to wear a mask the rest of my life? What's we all going to die? Like, what's going on here? I mean, it's just such a strange time. But I realized, our ratings were through the roof in 2020, and that's because people just wanted life to get back to normal. And here we are broadcasting games in an empty stadium, no atmosphere at all. It almost seems like a dream when I describe this to you. I mean, did that really happen? But I think I began to realize that my role is just to give people an outlet at the end of the day, to just sit and watch the game. We were talking about what I think the majority of the Royals audience looks like, and so I would like to think that I've been on the humble side compared to my peers about what my role is. Having grown up in the game with a father who was a player, coach, and a manager, like I understood where broadcasters ranked. I mean, if when we're done with this podcast, if an airplane crashes into my hotel room here, and that's it for me, they're going to play the game on opening day, and they're going to find somebody else to do the games. Now, if the players go away, the game goes away. If the fans go away, the game goes away at this level. But if I go away, they're just going to find somebody else. Maybe they'll have a little ceremony on opening day and hang a flag with my initials on it for one season or something like that. But other than that, they're going to move on. And I think I've always understood that. But after COVID, I began to realize that my job is to inform and to entertain too, but really just give the fans something else to think about for an hour or two before they go to bed at the end of the night. And that's when really my shift began. And with, me being able to share my faith, me being able to share my struggles with depression, I really began to realize, not just say it, but feel it, that I don't believe that God's purpose for my life was to call Major League Baseball games. His purpose for my life was to go through the things that I went through, for it to culminate in major depressive disorder and anxiety in 2005, to walk with me through all of that and then tell my story. That's all I do is just tell my story, and I use it to encourage other people that they too can get through what I got through with, proper usage of medication, counseling, life coach, and my faith. And I began to realize that that's why God has me here. Baseball is just a platform for me to be able to speak to groups or be able to speak to individuals. Josiah, I still have several people every baseball season. I'll walk out to my car after the game and somebody's out there waiting for me. And before they say a word, I know exactly what they're going to say. I read your book, and they don't want to say it in front of anybody else. I went through a lot of the same things you went through, and I just want to thank you for writing your book. It really helped me. And so that's why I'm here. Fortunately, I've been behind the microphone for some big moments in Royals history, but I didn't do anything on the field. I didn't get the hits. I didn't make the catch. I didn't make the big pitch. I'm just describing it. And anybody, when Salvi got the game-winning hit in the wild card, anybody could yell and scream into the microphone that the Royals won this incredible game in 2014. But it's more about the opportunities that I got to speak and the opportunities that I got to share my faith as a result of what other people accomplished. I mean, I spend my life talking about other people's accomplishments. Those aren't my accomplishments, they're other people's accomplishments. But with that comes the opportunity to share who I am and what God has done in my life.
And then finally, I want to end every episode we do in this series because there are people on these shows that have experiences. We've heard many of yours today, but what is something that you wish you would have known, something that you could tell your younger self so people like me, people in my age range, can learn from your experiences?
Yeah, we could do an entire episode on that. There's so many things. But for someone in your position, I think this goes back to a question that you asked earlier about stats and stories. If you want to get into play-by-play, number one, be open to different sports. If your goal is to take my job someday and be a broadcaster for the Royals, great. But you might have to learn to do basketball and football, or in my case, women's volleyball on television. I'm from Southern California, and I played beach volleyball for much of my high school years and even before that. So I knew the game, I knew the rules, I knew the lingo, and I got a chance to broadcast a women's volleyball game on TV, and people were like, huh, let's see if you can do women's gymnastics. I did a women's gymnastics meet, and that was all the ramp to getting to do the things that I wanted to do. So have a goal, have a goal. It's okay to tell people what your goal is. The very worst thing you could do, Josiah, is if you get an opportunity to talk to somebody in the broadcast field, or you talk to somebody who runs a station, TV station or radio station, and they say, Josiah, what do you want to do? The worst thing you can do is say, I don't know, just something in broadcasting. It's a terrible answer, and I hear it all the time from our interns or someone in college or whatever. It's a terrible answer. And here's why. If I like you and I really want to help you, and you don't tell me how I can help you, I can't help you. But if you come to me and you say, I want to be the next television voice of the Kansas City Royals, and I like you and I want to help you, great. Well, here are the things that I did. Or if you're an intern, well, I tell you what, why don't you come and sit in the booth with us for a couple of games and just see how we do TV, and go sit in the radio booth. If somebody likes you, help them to help you. Don't be afraid to tell them exactly what you want to do. Now, you have every right in the world to change your mind over time. I mean, I didn't get into this wanting to be a play-by-play announcer. I wanted to be a news anchor, believe it or not. But people liked me, and I was not afraid to tell them what I wanted to do. Now, the path may not be the way you want. You might have to do women's volleyball and women's gymnastics on your way to doing Major League Baseball or whatever. But be versatile. Don't be afraid to tell people what you want to do. If you become famous as a result of being a broadcaster, that's great if that's what you want. But don't get into this business because you want to be famous. Because chances are you will not be famous for a long time until you get the job that you really want. And I think when I was young and I was getting into this and doing internships, a lot of the other interns were just, all they thought about was, I want to be on the air because I know, I hear this all the time. Well, I know sports and I know numbers and people say I have a pretty good voice. And so I thought I should get into broadcasting. I've heard that 1,000 times. But really, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to do those assignments? My first job, I got $5 an hour at a radio station and $50 a game. But you know what? I loved it. I loved it. I couldn't wait for the next game. I enjoyed the preparation. I enjoyed hauling all the equipment around and setting it up and doing a broadcast. I mean, I loved it. And I wasn't famous. I mean, I really enjoyed it. So I think those are the main things. Be versatile, or let me put them in different order. Don't be afraid to tell someone what you want to do, but along the way, be versatile. You might say yes to as many things as you can in doing it. And make sure that you really love doing this, because you may not get to where you want to get right away. It might take 5 years. It might take 10 years. It might take 15 years. But if you love it every day, if you love going every day, the money and the fame is not going to be important. But that attitude is what ends up getting you to the next level.
It's an incredible answer, and it's very helpful to me as someone who wants to become a broadcaster, or to anybody who's listening. I also want to ask you the same question, but in respect, or I guess in the perspective of faith and your faith journey, what is something that you could tell someone, or what would you have told yourself a long time ago in your faith journey? You've already kind of mentioned a couple things, but if there's something specific, a phrase or something that you, or a verse that you would just point that person to.
Oh boy, there's so many verses that I love. As it pertains to my career, well, the famous proverb scripture that is used over and over again, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he'll make your path straight. There's a lot in there, but as I get older and I look back on my career, he will make your paths straight. A path can be a long journey. And sometimes we get on a path and we don't know, it looks like it goes left, but I don't know what's around the corner. Or maybe the path goes down into a valley and we're trying to look down into the valley and we don't know how long we're going to be in the valley. Or sometimes the path takes you to the top and you don't know how long you're going to be in there and the sun's shining and there's no shade or whatever. The late Tim Keller is one of my favorite pastors to listen to, and he gave a great sermon on life. And I think he said in the Bible, the word path is used like hundreds of times. But I think in today's culture, we're looking for a magic door. We're going to open this magic door and everything is just going to come to us right away. Just this is it's not that door, or maybe it's this door, or maybe it's that door. And really, the Christian walk is a long path, longer for some than others. But if we trust God, we lean more on his understanding and not ours, he will make our path straight. He will put us on a path where he gets us where he needs us to be. Look, I'm a broadcaster for the Royals because for whatever reason, God chose that for me. It's not like I decided one day, I'm going to go be a broadcaster for the Royals. It doesn't work that way. I mean, when I was younger, I would have told you that it was because of my hard work and because I did a good job and because I grew up in the game and blah, blah, blah. If that was not God's will, I would not be a broadcaster for the Royals. So that was my path. And walk on the path. Don't go running on the path. Don't go running up to the next thing, hoping there's a magic door up there, and running to the next thing and hoping there's a magic door. Because another thing I would tell my younger self if I could go back would just be slow down. What you're doing right now is great. Enjoy what you're doing right now. Master what you're doing this year. Don't worry about next year and the next promotion and the next contract and the next team or whatever. Just where you are right now. Be as good as you can be right now. Walk on the path. Don't run on the path. When God's ready to bring your path to the next great thing, let him take care of it. Don't try and be the one who decides where the path goes and where you're going to end up.
Well, thank you, Ryan, so much for coming on. This has been an incredible episode, and just based on this conversation, I'm extremely excited for the rest of these episodes because I've learned so much today, and I hope that people that are listening right now have learned just as much. So you've already taken care of our quote of the day, so I appreciate you tying that into your answer already, but I just want to thank you for coming on to the Power and Light podcast.
Thank you, Josiah. Had a good time.